Hey guys, what's going on? Danconia. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Playoffs Weekend 1 results. So, we are here. Playoffs. The majority of the playoffs have now happened this weekend. We have seen a crazy amount of games, and we have next weekend to fix up the people that will be going to the grand finals. The 2 from APAC and 2 from North America. Now, there have been a crazy amount of games this weekend. And it has been absolutely bonkers. That is the only way to describe it. We've had a new patch. We've had Roadhog buffed. We have had some crazy stuff going on. So we've got a lot to talk about. It's about time we get straight into it. We start off with the very bottom seeded teams where these games actually took place on the Thursday. So this actually started off with the Boston Uprising taking on the Houston Outlaws. So the Houston Outlaws, they've had a mixed season, they've had troubles in the main tank role and stuff like that. Boston Uprising, it's been even worse. Boston have looked very unconvincing and nothing really to say about that team. But this is weird. So this ends up as a 3-1 victory for the Boston Uprising. And I think there's several things to contribute to this. First of all, where the bloody hell was the Roadhog player for Houston Outlaws? That's a problem for the Outlaws. They ended up switching hydration back to the DPS role instead of the main tank role that he'd been playing most of the season. And I think there was a lot of disruption for the Outlaws. Linksa had his bright spots, but apart from that, everyone was below par. When we look at the Boston Uprising, this meta, this brawly deathmatch, rather like solo skill-based meta, kind of favours them slightly. And the reason for this is they can rely much more on individual pop-off potential instead of relying on highly advanced teamwork, which Boston have struggled with a lot this season. But instead, you could put Fusions on the Roadhog. He's actually got a really nice Roadhog. Punk on the Zarya. You've got Color Hex on Tracer. You've got Jerry on Ashe, and Jerry did very well. And they just outmatch, like skill versus skill of each hero, they outmatch the Houston Outlaws, without needing that really high level of communication and team synergy to pull anything off. And I think that's the main reason why the Boston Uprising have got a victory over the Houston Outlaws here. This ultimately is very disappointing for the Outlaws, who are expected to get a comprehensive victory over this Uprising side. And they are the first team to bow out of the playoffs, or the play-ins at this point. And yeah, there are questions to be asked of the Houston Outlaws. I think the meta really didn't favour them. If we'd stuck to what we saw before these playoffs, at any point during the season, whatever we'd seen, I think the Outlaws get the victory over the Uprising. But this meta was perfect for the Uprising, and so I think this is what gets them that victory, and aside of the Outlaws not having a great Roadhog player to rely on. Then we had the Washington Justice taking on the Vancouver Titans. Now, this is extremely interesting. I thought the Justice would win this match. I thought the power of Decay and Stitch, because I thought, honestly, I wanted to see the Justice play Stitch and Decay together in the DPS roles. That happened, but in a different way. So what Justice have ran this weekend is Stitch and Tuba on the DPS roles. We've seen a lot of Tuba Pharah, and we've seen a lot of Stitch Ashe. And Decay has actually picked up the Zarya and is playing instead of Raw alongside Janu, who is playing the Roadhog. And this has been magnificent for the Washington Justice. Now, I go back to the point I made with the Boston Uprising and this not requiring a massive high level of team synergy. And I think this benefits the Washington Justice as well, relying on real individual mechanical skill and individual skill, which honestly, I have thought for a long time since the Justice actually picked up Stitch and Janu that they've got individual skill, just haven't been able to nail down that teamwork that has seen them not pick up the wins that we expected them to pick up after picking up those two great players. Add Decay onto this, who has got crazy mechanical skill that we all know about, and all of a sudden you've got a team that looks really threatening in this particular meta. Janu on the Hog is pretty crazy as well. And this is a 3-0 for the Washington Justice. This is an absolute stomp for the Justice. Vancouver Titans did not have anything to put up against this Justice side. And as I'm sure you've seen if you've been watching the Justice this weekend, we will be talking about this as a running theme. Because Justice have turned up during these playoffs big time. And are sort of realizing the potential that their players have and taking Raw out of the equation, which at a lot of the times has been a weak link for this Justice side, has really enabled them to push forward. It is very interesting what's happening at the Washington Justice right now, but we will be coming back to them in a minute. Because now we are going to move over to our first match of the APAC playoffs, the play-ins in APAC actually, and this was the London Spitfire taking on the Chengdu Hunters, which happened on Friday. Now, this was a one that I thought was going to be fairly close. I thought London were coming with a lot of preparation and a lot of ideas to try and take down the Hunters. The Hunters had a lot of preparation time themselves as they finished their season early compared to the London Spitfire. This ends up as a 3-1 for the Chengdu Hunters. This is disappointing from the Spitfire. I thought they would have come out with more in the bag in this match, and they really, really didn't. Chengdu Hunters outclassed them. This Chaos meta, obviously, really plays into the Hunters. Although, we saw less of the Roadhog, we saw more of the Among Ball and the Late Young Zarya, which the Chengdu Hunters are absolutely love to play. And Hunters really did kind of outclass the Spitfire. We did see Spitfire take on different looks with Celestin and Banar in on Zarya and Roadhog, or Roadhog Diva. Nothing really worked. JMac was on the first map. Again, that didn't work either. There were some bright lights for the Spitfire, like Glister, like Babel, and Banar. Banar had a particularly good match, I thought. But in the end, the entire team was not up to scratch to compete with this Chengdu Hunters side. So your inaugural season champions go out of the first hurdle, and yes, some thinking to do in the off season for London Spitfire. I think it's going to be a very big off season for this team. But we are going to start rattling through these now. Let's get back to NA, where we see the Toronto Defiant taking on Los Angeles Gladiators. Toronto Defiant were the lower seeded team here. Gladiators picked the Toronto Defiant to take on. This was a massively close one, and it ends up as a 3-2 for the Los Angeles Gladiators. Toronto Defiant end up playing Agilities on the Roadhog, which is interesting. They didn't have the ability to compete with the quality that the Gladiators have, though. When you look at Gladiators with OG and Space, Birdering, Kevster, Mirror as well, there is a lot of quality in that Gladiators side. Although I am very impressed about how close this was. Toronto Defiant really did give this a darn good go, and I think they should be respected for that. They were up against a very tough opponent, and I think this is, in some respects, a good result for the Defiant, even though it ends their playoff run this season. Then we come back to the Boston Uprising. They were picked by Atlanta Reign. So, Atlanta Reign, I believe, were the highest seed in this part of the tournament. Is it the Dallas Fuel? I might be wrong. But this ends up as a 3-1 victory for the Atlanta Reign. So this is where the comp starts to fall apart for the Boston Uprising. Things become much more sort of well worked out for the Atlanta Reign. A lot more synergy, not as easily broken up as this Houston Outlaws side is. Boston Uprising then kind of get picked apart by the Reign, and it was evident here that the meta was not going to carry them any further than where it was. 3-1 for the Atlanta Reign, I think, is a pretty fair result. Boston Uprising, though, to not go out with the first hurdle against the Houston Outlaws has got to be regarded as a success, considering to what's happened to them the rest of the season. And I think it's a platform to build off. Again, it's another team that's going to have a very big off season if they want to get much better than they have been this season. Then we stumble across the Washington Justice once again as they go up against Dallas Fuel. This was the match I wanted to see. Decay returning to his old team. The question is, how did it work out? 3-0 for the Washington Justice. The Washington Justice stomped this. This was not close. Dallas Fuel got boomed after map 2. This was rough for the Fuel. Really rough. There's not much I can say about it, and it must be absolutely gutting for the Dallas Fuel to lose to Decay. Decay has been phenomenal on this area. Absolutely phenomenal. And there is not much else I can say about it. Justice very, very, very much deserve this win, and at this point, 6-0 in maps in the playoffs. I don't think a lot of people would have predicted that, even with the addition of Decay. The meta has really, really benefited the Justice going in here. Then we move over back to APAC, where we see the Chengdu Hunters in action again. They were picked by the New York Excelsior to take them on. This is extremely close. Chengdu Hunters make this extremely close. This is a 3-2 for the New York Excelsior. We don't see a choke from the Excelsior, but I think some of the maps that they lost were winnable for them. Chengdu Hunters, it's a meta that is good for them, but I don't ever see a meta that's going to propel them to being absolutely the best team, no doubt, and league winners, unless they change up what they're currently doing. That's the brutal honesty for me with the Chengdu Hunters. New York Excelsior grind out the 3-2 win, and I think they deserved it in the end. They've gone back to playing Hopper though, which is a slight worry for me. Then we saw the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Hangzhou Spark. Oh boy. The Gesture Roadhog is a revelation. Gesture, his positioning and his ability to know where to be and when to be there is fantastic. It's made him one of the best tank players in the world, and it makes his Winston so good. And this was evident here with Gesture on the Roadhog. His Roadhog is cracked. They get a 3-0 victory over the Hangzhou Spark, dumping the Hangzhou Spark out at the first hurdle of these playoffs, with actually a team that they just couldn't compete with Seoul. Seoul were too good. They got either out-comped or out-skilled. Seoul Dynasty are turning up in these playoffs, as we kind of expected. And if you are a team further in the bracket, I would be worried, because this Seoul Dynasty side is starting to click just at the right time, and the meta with Gesture on the Roadhog is looking like their playground right now in APAC. But now we move back over to North America on the Saturday, and this is where we see the big boys come in. So we saw the Los Angeles Gladiators taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. Philadelphia Fusion, #1 in North America. And it's, were they #1 or #2? I think #1 in North America, Philadelphia Fusion. And they look like #1. And what I love about the Philadelphia Fusion right now is they're not relying on car play like they always used to. We saw Hisu and we saw Ivy, and it looked really, really good. Philadelphia Fusion get a 3-0 victory over the Los Angeles Gladiators, starting their playoff campaign in style. Gladiators are not out of it yet. They drop down to the losers bracket, but Philadelphia Fusion, this is a really good win, and exactly the way you want to start these playoffs. So I am very impressed with this Philadelphia Fusion side so far, and we will see if they can push on further. Then we see the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Florida Mayhem. Florida Mayhem, they were 4th seed, so they didn't actually get to pick their opponent, and they get lobbed with the Valiant, who are their massive bogey team this year, and it showed. Again, the Valiant get a 3-2 victory over the Florida Mayhem. It is close, but the Mayhem have a problem going up against the Los Angeles Valiant. They always have done, and I can't say they always will do, but it is a major problem for this Mayhem side. And so the Mayhem drop down to the losers bracket at the first attempt, which is not great for them, and it'll be interesting to see what they do from here on in. Then we get to see the Washington Justice, who we never expected to be in this position, up against the San Francisco Shock. And this is interesting. So at this point, Shock haven't played a game yet. Justice have just 3-0'd two Texas teams. Two teams, sorry, not two Texas teams. And this is extremely close. Washington Justice got 2-0. And all of a sudden we are talking about a 3-0 against the current reigning champions, which would have been absolutely phenomenal and very, very much doable. It does end up getting reverse swept though, so the San Francisco Shock got a 3-2 victory. Washington Justice were not far from really just completely dumping the Shock into the losers bracket. It easily could have gone the Justice's way. It was very close. It really required all of the Shock's strength, really, to get past this Justice side. And this Justice side are not out of it. By far not out of it yet. So we may see a rematch of this further down the line. It's going to be super interesting. But this Justice side, you do not want to play them. You do not want to play them. But then the last of those, was it quarterfinals this way? I think it was quarterfinals, was the Atlanta Reign taking on the Paris Eternal. This was a shocker. So this was a 3-2 victory for the Atlanta Reign. Very close, but a very good victory for the Atlanta Reign. Paris Eternal looking unconvincing. And I thought this going into the playoffs, the meta really doesn't favour Atlanta. It really doesn't favour Paris, sorry. Going into this, if we'd been in the Genji meta, then I would have predicted Paris as one of the favourites just to go all the way. But this time around, it feels very much different. And so we are now thinking, are Paris going to be able to maintain this? They drop down to the losers bracket with Atlanta Reign getting a massive, massive victory here. and a victory a lot of people wouldn't have actually expected, which is really, really, really good. And it's nice to see Atlanta Reign kind of popping off again, which is really, really nice. Then we move back over to the APAC region for the last time this weekend, actually. And we saw the New York Excelsior taking on the Shanghai Dragons. The Dragons picked to play the Excelsior because, let's be honest, they weren't going to pick to play the Seoul Dynasty, were they? And this is a 3-1 victory for the Shanghai Dragons. Again, there is a clear quality difference between the Shanghai Dragons and the New York Excelsior. Shanghai Dragons are a fantastic team. We've known that all season long, and this has not changed right now. We haven't seen them against possibly the best team in APAC quite yet, but Shanghai Dragons definitely deserve this win, and this means New York Excelsior will be dropping down to the losers bracket. Then in the other game in APAC, we would see the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Guangzhou Charge, and I said the Seoul Dynasty, it falls right into their ballpark. Guangzhou Charge, again, lack of clear Roadhog player. They sub in Nero, who we haven't seen for a very long time, and I think was honestly a bad move. No offense to Nero, I think he was a great player, but he's been out of the loop for so long now. I think it possibly would have been just better to stick with Eileen and Happy, and they didn't. And they got completely outdone by the Seoul Dynasty. This is a 3-0 for the Seoul Dynasty. Seoul looked by far the better team. Guangzhou Charge, they did not look like a team that was second seed. They really, really didn't. It's a very much a case you could like to the Paris Eternal, where the meta really is not in the Guangzhou Charge's favour, and there's not much you can say about it. Guangzhou Charge are not out of it. They will play New York Excelsior, I believe, in the losers bracket. But this is... I don't think the Guangzhou Charge will go any further, because I think the Excelsior will beat the Guangzhou Charge, if I'm honest. But that's for a preview video for next week. But I think this Seoul Dynasty side, however... Oh, boy. This Seoul Dynasty side. There's going to be a heck of a match next week. Shanghai Seoul. Oh, boy. Oh boy, I think that's the top two in Asia right now. This is going to be really interesting. We have 4 more matches to go through though in North America, so let's take a look at them then. This was the losers bracket and the other 2 matches in the winners bracket. So, we started off with the Los Angeles Gladiators taking on the Florida Mayhem. Now, the last time we saw this match was actually, I believe, the last week of the season, or the second to last week of the season, where we saw the Mayhem get a victory. It was 3-1 during then. This has developed since. The Florida Mayhem sort of activated a, we need to kind of like get on here, we need to be playing at the very top of our game, and they get a 3-0 victory over the Gladiators, which I think will be disappointing from a Gladiators point of view. I really thought the Gladiators had the potential to make this close. This means the Gladiators will be going out at this stage. I don't think that's a terribly bad place for the Gladiators to be going out. I think they've had a good playoffs. Considering their inconsistency during the regular season, I think this playoffs has been good, and I didn't really expect them to get much further than they have got. So I think it's been a decent playoffs. It's not been an overachievement, but it's certainly not been an underachievement either. So I think it's been good for the Gladiators. Mayhem, however, now they have a very different prospect to sort out in the next match, but we will talk about that in a minute. Then we had the Washington Justice taking on the Paris Eternal. Now, talking of underachievement... This is a 3-0 for the Washington Justice. So there's only one team that the Washington Justice hasn't 3-0'd during this week, and this is the San Francisco Shock. Paris Eternal, they had no idea how to deal with what the Washington Justice were throwing at them. They had no idea. It was... They just didn't. First of all, in the first 2 maps, they did not want to run Roadhog's area. So Justice were like, we're gonna wreck you then. And then in the last map on Volskaya, they decide to run the Roadhog Zarya by putting Sparkle in on Zarya and putting Asun and Exi alongside each other. Exi, I believe, had some illness problems or something as well. It all fell apart for the Paris Eternal, and it wasn't close. It was very much a Paris win. Decay is doing wonders on the Zarya for Washington. Stitch and Tuba are turning up. It's Janu on the Hog is fantastic. And yeah, it is what it is. This is extremely disappointing for the Paris Eternal, I am sure, and they would have expected to get much further. Yeah, there's not much I can say. But after this, we moved back to the winners bracket, and we had the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. This was a 3-0 win for the Philadelphia Fusion. Again, Philadelphia Fusion getting the job done so far in this playoffs, which is really, really good. They haven't been massively, massively close. 2 3-0 victories over both LA teams. 2 good teams as well. So I think this has been a fantastic weekend for the Philadelphia Fusion and a great platform to build some momentum going through these playoffs, which is what the Fusion need. They have come second so many times. I'm sure they don't want it to happen again. And they're setting up a big, big match next weekend, because the other match was the Atlanta Reign taking on the San Francisco Shock. This was a 3-1 win for the San Francisco Shock. I didn't expect any different, really. I'm glad the Reign picked up a map. I don't think the Reign have the quality to compete with the San Francisco Shock. I think the San Francisco Shock individually will outdo them in any meta, whether it be this brawly Roadhog Zarya meta or whether it be dive or double barrier or whatever. The Shock will end up coming out on top in the end. And so I think this is a fair result. Atlanta Reign, though, they're definitely not out of it, and they drop down to the losers bracket, which, again, it's possible for Atlanta to do something, but they're really going to have to pay up to pop off. I still think the Atlanta Reign have got further than anyone expected, really. And so I think it's been good so far for the Atlanta Reign. But when we talk about next week, when they have to go up against the Mayhem, oh, it starts to get tough. It starts to get tough. So, yeah. Next week is going to be super interesting. And obviously with Shock and Fusion winning, that means we will see Shock and Fusion in the winners final. Which is going to be... That's going to be one hell of a match. It is going to be the biggest match of the season, hopefully, so far. And I honestly can't wait. I'm hyped. The 2 winners finals, Shanghai versus Seoul, and for the Fusion versus the Shock, these are going to be massive matches. Massive matches, and ones you really, really do not want to miss out on. Tune in for them. Please tune in for them, because there's going to be some fantastic Overwatch on show. But that's for a preview as well. There have been some great matches this weekend. If you're going to go back and watch any New York Excelsior versus the Hunters, there is one of the picks I can pick from Asia, although I think the better matches have definitely been in North America, where we like Gladiators Defiant. Watch some of the Justice matches if you haven't watched them, because Justice, Decay, oh man. And then obviously, you know, you've got matches like Paris versus Atlanta and Shock versus Justice, really, really close. Valiant versus Mayhem. It's going to be an interesting rest of the playoffs. That's all I can say right now. And it's living up to hype. No one's brackets are left in that competition, by the way, so rip all of you. Justice have turned up. Can anyone stop the Justice in the losers bracket? That's my question, and I'm not so sure. Oh boy, who are going to be those final 4? We'll see, but the preview will be up very soon, Team of the Week as well. I'm going to leave it here for this one. So thank you guys so much for this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.